All right. Well, good morning. So good to be with you. Yes, hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. Um, Good, wonderful conversations around the Thanksgiving table, which are never awkward. They're never political. They're never having to be edited for children's ears. None of those things happened at our table. Hope you had a great week. And it's for me. It is officially Christmas time. So I love me some Thanksgiving. I think it is such a godly thing to give thanks, to be gratitude, to have grateful hearts. And now we have entered into Christmas. And this year specifically, y'all, I mean, last Sunday, we were cleaning up leaves. Thanks again for everybody that came out. It was beautiful. It was 70. It was just a nice fall day. And then we had Thanksgiving, and then we woke up on Friday morning to snow and like a soft, fluffy snow on Colorado sunshine. We went and got our Christmas tree. I got dressed all up like a lumberjack, put on the beanie, put on the boots, let somebody else bought a tree that was already cut down. They trimmed it for me. They put it on my crossover. It's fine. We got our Christmas tree, and I am just full of like Christmas time. We started doing Advent with our kids last night. I got my Advent worship playlist going. I'm just, for the next month, call me Chris Kringle, don't really, but we're going to have a good time. And so we've been spending this last couple of weeks, and 2 weeks ago, Amy shared just on the idea of gratitude. And then last week, we talked about the goodness of God. And really, this is, as we, even culturally, even as we, as a country, as we kind of, and around the world for Christmas, but as we celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas, this is a time where we can take these two very godly, biblical ideas that go hand in hand of having great gratitude and being a generous people. And so today I want to share a little bit about generosity, even as Kenny just read through the passage of Scripture there. And so I want you to be encouraged, though. Amy asked my kids to pray for me today. And so you are in good hands. Mariah prayed for me that I would preach about the glory of God. And then Aiden prayed that I would see and that you would see what God is doing in the room. And I thought, this is going to be a good Sunday. I don't even care what I say because I know God heard those prayers, and so I can just say whatever, and God's going to be at work. But as we jump in, we've been talking about gratitude and generosity, and really want to focus this morning on generosity. Good news for you, I hope. This is not a money sermon. This is not like a money sermon cloaked in the word generosity. Maybe for some of you it will be, but that's between you and Jesus. And so even as we begin this Christmas season or this Advent season, Advent, of course, being the idea of coming, Christ is coming. And this is a time where we prepare our hearts to celebrate his first coming, and we look to his second coming. And so even next week, we'll start actually going through the themes of Advent. And so Eric Gomez is going to share next week on hope, and Eric Gomez is an Advent king, and so you're in for a treat there. Today, though, we want to talk about generosity. And I don't know if you've ever been. Have you ever just been lavished with generosity? Like where you just feel like overflowing the way people give to you, what it does to you, how it marks you, what it does inside of you. There's a couple things that come to mind. Not long ago, a couple months ago actually, Amy and I got to go to this event at a church. This is a conference for lead pastors, and we were well seasoned 3 months into this role. And surrounded by pastors that have been leading for decades, and just felt like we had so much to offer and give in that moment. But I was blown away by the generosity of this church and the way that they invited these lead pastors, and they literally just for a day and a half just spoiled us. And better than spoiling us, they spoiled my kids. My kids were in like bounce houses and zoos. I don't even know what they were doing. They had so much sugar. My kids love that church. I'm telling you, they think it is the greatest church. Boulder Street's second, but that is the greatest church. And it's just something when people are generous and when they give kind of overflowing, it marks you. And so Amy and I were just moved and like I felt like, man, I want to like express my gratitude. And so even just wrote out a letter, just kind of a thank you card and sent it to them. I feel like this is the least I can do. We felt like just really spoiled, like, wow, thank you. And then I get a text back that was like, so moved by your thank you card. I shared it with our staff. Thank you for saying, and I'm like, no, you don't get to win. You can't be more generous than let me at least say thank you. So generous. It marked us. Another experience, Amy and I, kind of right before we went into the season of life where we had kids, we went on a vacation with some of our friends. And so one of our closest friends has family that lives in Italy. And so we went to Italy. This is like a big vacation for us. And it was kind of one of those where the way it worked out is we just had to pay for airfare to get there. And once we landed in country, this family spoiled us like crazy. They just were so generous. They took care of us. They got us like an apartment in Rome. Like I think that like one of their relatives left their apartment so we could stay in it. They gave us a car. They just gave and gave and gave. I came home with just like this revelation of hospitality like I had never seen before. But let me tell you, the most generous moment in this Italian culture was around that dinner table. We had some decent food in Rome, but we got to eat with some locals. And we got to eat around an Italian table. And let me tell you, I remember there's one moment that I won't soon forget. I haven't yet. And so we're there and we're ready. And they bring out the meal and they set it on the table. And Amy and I have never really been in this setting. We've kind of, usually when we're in other countries, it's for like a missions trip. And so we kind of put on that missions mentality, right? So when you're on missions, you know, whatever is put before you, you eat and you eat it all. So this was actually very easy to do that. So they brought out, they sat at the table, and they brought out this incredible food. It's like charcuterie times 1,000, and we're just eating it. Amy's just like, oh, this is so good. And so we get so full. And then they're like, okay, great, let's clear the table for the next course. And it's like, no, we're good. And they bring out the next course. And we eat as much as we can. And we're like, wow, this is so extravagant, so generous. And I said, wonderful, let's clear the table for the next course. Course number 3 comes out, then 4, then 5, then 6. Course 7, I'm so full. I don't know how there's all this food in this house. And I'm just like, and Amy is done. Amy literally passes out on the couch. She's so full. She's eaten so much food. And this 90-year-old grandpa is mocking her, laughing at her because she cannot stay awake because she's eaten so much food. It's just this generous thing. They just overwhelmed us with generosity. And when someone is generous to you, I don't know what it does for you, but for me, it just is this marking thing. You don't soon forget it. It's like, wow, you were so generous. I didn't earn that. I didn't deserve that. This family was so kind to us. We were not their family. It made sense to me that they took care of their family. I was treated like I was part of the family. I've never felt so in an Italian family. I was like, this is a great moment in my life. Today I want to talk just briefly, I hope, about our response to God's generosity. And because he is generous, that we can and should be a generous people. That as believers in Jesus, we ought be marked by our generosity, the way that we shower extravagantly on other people. So even I'm going to say the word generosity a lot today, or generous. And so just a quick definition there from the wonderful dictionary.com. I'm sure it's very prestigious. A liberal giving or sharing, unselfish. When you're generous, it's a liberal giving. It's extravagant. It's excessive. It's not just giving the bare minimum, but giving above and beyond. Liberal giving or sharing. I know I lost some of you with that first word. Just think excessive. Number 2 from Oxford Dictionary, showing a readiness to give more of something as money or time than it's strictly necessary or expected. Showing a readiness to give more than is expected. My hope, my prayer is that we, as individuals and as a people, would be known for our generosity. think it's fair for each of us. I encourage you today. I'm asking myself. I was all week. I was this morning. I encourage you to ask the question, am I generous? Like when I think of myself, and here's the thing about generosity, God talks about generosity and that he loves a cheerful giver. And there's something about generosity that is marked by the heart. And so actually, only you and Jesus know how generous you are. Generosity isn't marked by the amount that you give. Generosity, now, your life will give testimony of generosity, but like when you ask the question, am I generous? And I'm asking this question, like, am I a generous person? And is this something this is in first person? This is not, are you generous? This is, am I generous? God, we just prayed this, like we just had church. Search me and know me. God, am I generous the way that you are generous? Do I live that way? It's a question that I hope that we all ask regularly. It's a matter of the heart. It's one of God's ways that he uses to uproot selfishness in our own lives. It's one of the things that he uses to uproot where we live for self, is that we begin to live in such a way that we are giving and we are extravagantly pouring out for others. But if I am full disclosure, if I'm really honest, I can tell you that when I say, am I generous? When I look at myself, or even I ask the Lord, I will say, at best, on my best day, not as much as I'd like to be. Like, it's not that I'm never generous, but is my life marked with generosity? And have I reached that point where I can actually say, like, I think I'm a generous person. I am not as generous as I want to be. I want to be more generous. But there are things in my life, barriers or enemies to generosity. I'm going to share some of those, and so you can judge me if you please, or you can relate with me. I think there's some things that come and rob or come and are enemies to generosity. And so the first one, I would say, these are kind of the things that would keep us from having a generous mindset, of being willing to give over and abundantly more than what's expected, pouring out blessing towards others. The first one is, I would just say, the thing that maybe sometimes creeps in and keeps me from being generous is a scarcity mindset. Scarcity. There's only so much. I'm afraid of what if I give too much, like I'm afraid of what's going to happen. And, I joke sometimes about growing up, because if I don't laugh, I cry. No, I'm just joking. I remember, so my family, mom, dad, then my brother and sisters. There's 3 of them, 1 brother, 2 sisters. They're triplets, and then I came later, so there's 6 of us. And we would go out to eat once a week for family night. And that was like the big night that we went out to eat sometimes. And so when we did, we would go to a restaurant and we would order 3 meals, 6 waters. That's it, getting out of that place, right? Like we got 6 of us. We're splitting a meal. So you get to the restaurant, you get around the table. Who are you partnering up with tonight? You're splitting that meal. Waters all around. I had one sister that was kind of the rebel of the group. Sometimes she would order a Coke. I always let her order before me, because I knew if Dana got a Coke, I'm getting a Coke. See, I learned the system. To this day, I have a bit of a scarcity mindset. You can ask Amy. I hate sharing meals. I'm like, no, we are not sharing. I'm getting my own meal. Get your fork out of my food. This is my meal. I got my Coke. This is mine, right? And there's just this attitude, though, of kind of scarcity. And I think one of the phrases that maybe sometimes we say is that, I'd say this phrase kind of creeps in my brain that keeps me from being generous. I would love to be generous, but I just can't afford it. I can't afford. If I had more, then I could be more generous. But right now, I just can't afford to be generous. I don't have enough. I can't give of my time. I won't have enough time to myself. I can't give of my talents or my gifts because I'm afraid I'll be taken advantage of. I won't have enough energy for my own life. I can't give of my resources because I just am afraid that I won't have enough. It's going to run out. And listen, I'm just sharing you me. I'm not saying this is you. I'm just sharing you me. Sometimes it's easy to say, I can't afford to be generous. We all know the beautiful thing about God is that you can't outgive him, that he is the most generous of all, and that he is a good father who loves to give good gifts. But a lot of times it's just this worry, this fear. Fear creeps in of what might happen. Like, even when I start to get ahead, have you ever had that moment where you start to get ahead and it's like, oh my goodness, I paid the bills this month. And it's like, whoo, we got a little bit extra. We ended in the black this month. Okay, good. What is coming down the pipe? If you have a phone, you've probably seen this. Do we have this? Is the screen's not working? Or do we got it? Here we go. You got this? You know, this is like you finally catch up on all your bills. And then your car. That flat tire is right around the corner. You know, something is happening. The car, it's a robber of generosity. I'm telling you, cars, man, it's the worst. And you got to so then you're like, no, I can't give because I don't know what's about to happen. Jesus in Matthew 6 talks a lot about this concept. Matthew 6:25-34 is all about do not worry. Don't let worry and anxiety and fear rob you because you are a child of the King. You have enough. You're going to be okay. You're going to be taken care of. 2 Corinthians 9. So this is the verse we read. This is the passage we read earlier. We're going to stay in 2 Corinthians a lot. 2 Corinthians, Paul writing to the Corinthian church. This is probably his fourth letter to them, though we call it 2 Corinthians. We have two that we don't necessarily have in Scripture. But so he wrote a letter. So Paul goes, establishes the church. Then he leaves. Church starts going haywire. He writes a letter. 1 Corinthians, he's like, hey, guys. They start to do a little better. Then things kind of go sideways. He visits them. He writes them. Things are going good. Things aren't going good. He visits them, and like they don't necessarily really like Paul, which is kind of funny, but like they're like, hey, maybe we should I don't know if you're actually like valid to lead this thing. And he's like, I started this thing. Like, what are you talking about? And they're like, you're not very eloquent. You don't got a lot of history, and we just don't really know. And so Paul kind of correcting some stuff. And 2 Corinthians 9, though, and 8 and 9 really is his call to generosity. And him reminding them of their a year ago when they pledged to be generous. Have you ever pledged to be generous? And then you're like, oh, why did I do that? Oh, I wish I hadn't said I would do that. The Corinthian church had pledged to be generous, and Paul was like, hey, remember, let's follow through. 2 Corinthians 9, verse 8. God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Matthew 7:11, Jesus here again on the Sermon on the Mount. If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? This idea of we can't afford it, listen, this is what we talked about all last week. You have a good Father who's going to take care of you. He's going to make sure that you are never, this is the idea of I've never seen the righteous go without. Like, God will be there for you. And it's not that like, oh, I'm going to just whatever, live frivolously and live however I want. And God's got my back on this. But it's just saying, listen, this is the idea. Like, Jesus is the most generous one. I have never been upset at my kids when they've been generous. They've done some stuff with their money that I'm like, brr. I don't know about that. I'm trying to teach them responsibility, and it seems to be backfiring. But the moments that they're generous, I'm like, oh, we had this fun moment not long ago. We were driving, and we were at a stoplight, and Mariah saw a gentleman outside with a sign, and he was asking for money. I didn't see him, and all of a sudden, just from the back seat, in like quite the stick-em-up voice, I just heard, Dad, give that man some money. I was like, what is happening? I don't know what's going on. I love just the innocence of like, hey, there's someone in need. We have enough. Dad, you take care of me. You're going to keep taking care of me. Give him some of what you got. We have a good Father who loves to give good gifts. He's going to take care of you. And when we're generous, I think it moves his heart and it makes him all the more say, yes, I got you. Be generous. Don't have this scarcity mindset that there's not enough. Don't say this other one in kind of scarcity. It's unwise right now. It's just not wise. I want to be a good steward. I don't want to waste what God's given me. And I just want to, this is my excuse of like, oh, I could be generous, but I just don't know. Like, and rather than, praying about it, I just surmise that I probably shouldn't do it. Listen, in the kingdom, it is unwise to not be generous. When you give generously, then you can expect not only the joy that comes with being generous, but that God will give to you abundantly. Let's just read some scripture here. Proverbs, or let's go Psalms 1:12-5. Good will come to those who are generous and lend freely, who conduct their affairs with justice. Proverbs 11:25. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and the one who waters will himself be watered. Luke 6:38. Give, and it will be given to you. Read this. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. It will be poured into your lap. For the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I'm telling you, this idea of like, I got to be wise so I can't give to other people or I can't be generous. No. You want to give. Be generous. It is the way of the kingdom where God says, oh, my kids are generous. Let me get it, shake it up, and pour it back on them. It is unwise for us to not be generous because we have a good Father who delights. He is a rewarder. This is one of his titles, the rewarder. He sees what you're doing, and he's like, yeah, they're being like me. I want to give it back to them. Another mindset that sometimes sets in is a bit of a stingy mindset. You know I'm talking about stingy? I can be stingy. I don't know if you're ever stingy. I can be stingy. This comes out the most. I'm going to make some enemies right here. I apologize ahead of time. I just know. I see the room. I know. My stinginess sometimes comes out in a tipping situation. Specifically, when the waiter has maybe not done a great job. And then you get the check. Anybody know this moment? Like you've just had, we had a moment this week actually, where I was like, whoo, this person, maybe, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. This is their first day. This is their first day. And then you get the check, and you go to sign, and it says the place for the tip, and it says 22%, 25%, 30%, and I'm like, what happened to 20? I'm generous. What happened to 20? Like, you know what I'm saying? And so then I start to think, now I know it is in my means to be kind right now. And we're actually talking about a difference of about 75 cents. Like, that's really what we're talking about here. And somehow in my brain, I think, and I'm like, I don't know, they didn't do a very good job. And if I tip 18%, my assumption is that they look at that and they think, wow, I really need to get better at my job. That's not what they think. Do you know what they think? That dude is stingy. He held back 75 cents. 75. In that moment, I'm so tempted. I have enough, and I can bless. And I can look at them and I can say, hey, I'm not doing this because you did a great job. I just have, and I can bless you with 75 cents. And it's so tempting to teach them a lesson and hold back that 75 cents. It's easy. Sometimes when we're stingy, we think of the thought, generosity is for those who have more than me. I would be generous if I had more. Those that have more than me, they'll be the generous ones. Statistically speaking, I won't go into this, but there's been studies run that actually the least of these in society and in culture are often the ones that give the most. And that there's not a proportionate giving with the more that you have, the more that you give. And so there's not truth that generosity is just let for those who have more and in excess. And so in the kingdom, we are asked for anyone and everyone to be generous. It's not, hey, when you have a lot, then you can be generous. It's actually the opposite. It's when you have little, God sees the heart. This is the widow with her 2 mites, right? She gave out of her lack. She gave of what she did not have, and it moved Jesus' heart. Acts 20, verse 35. Jesus, Paul quoting Jesus, says, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Jesus, like Paul's talking to Jesus. Now, I don't know when Jesus said this. This is not in the Gospels. This is just Paul and Jesus hanging out. Paul's probably blind. Jesus shone his light around him, and he's like, oh, what do I do now? And Jesus is like, it's better to give than to receive. I don't know when this happened, but Paul quoting Jesus, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Would we be a generous people? 2 Corinthians 8:12. This is a little earlier than what we read, but to the Corinthian church. For the readiness is there, It is acceptable according to what the person has, not according to what he does not have. Your giving is acceptable to the Lord based on what you got. It's not based on what you don't got. It's based on what you got. And can you be generous with what you have? That's all you can be generous with. You cannot be generous with what you don't have. But with that which he has given to you, you can be generous. You can look to how can I bless other people. Here's a fun one. I just don't trust how they're going to use my generosity. I just don't trust how they're going to use my generosity. This can be all sorts of ways. I think this is a predisposition, maybe in sometimes when we're giving to those who have less than us, and we're kind of put in that position where we're like prejudging. I don't know what they're going to do with this, and so I'm going to hold back. That's not what God is asking for you to judge what they're going to do with it. I remember a moment when I was a teenager walking. I lived in Seattle and was downtown, and I was walking with a missionary, and she walked past someone who was in need, and she reached in to her wallet. This is a woman who, missionary, she lived on support. I knew her financial means, and I was like, oh, how kind. Like, she's going to, pull out some of her change and give this person some money. She didn't pull out change. She pulled out bills. And not just bills, like big bills. I was like, what are you doing? What are they going to do with that? You don't know what they're going to do with that. And she's like, I don't care what they do with it. I've been blessed. I want to be a blessing. They're in need. What are you talking about? Not that I don't care, but I care, but whatever. We're not called to judge. This is really prevalent, I think, with where we give, to organizations or to ministries or to churches. And I don't know if I trust them with what they're going to do with it. Listen, that's between those people and Jesus. What's between you and Jesus is what you do with what he gives you. And so I'm not saying just give frivolously and give to everybody and who cares what they do with it. Do your research, do your homework, be responsible, but don't let the phrase of I'm going to withhold out of, and it's really just an excuse. It's not actually logical. It's just that you don't want to give. I'll say to me, I'm sorry, I don't want to give. And so I'll use it as an excuse to be stingy. Okay, last little thing here. The very root and core of lack of generosity is selfishness. Seen Finding Nemo, when they come with the fish, and it's just all the birds are like, mine, 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 mine. All the parents in the room definitely know this scene. We know it because that is a scene in a movie we've all seen far too many times. It is also the scene that plays out on Saturday mornings every week between our children. Mine, 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 mine. It's mine. It's one of the first words that kids learn. Mine, mine. This is mine. I remember the sweet days when Mariah was so generous. Now those things are hers. Because there's something in us that just, this is mine. I want it. It's mine. And one of the things that I think gets in us is this idea that I have of hey, I've worked for something. I've earned it. I'm entitled to it. It's mine. And so I think the picture, this goes back to the heart idea. In John 12, we have this story, and we've talked about this story so much, where Mary brings in her gift before Jesus. She's met Jesus. She's heard Jesus. She's listened to Jesus. She knows what's going on. She knows he is headed towards his death. She's the one that hears his story. And she says, oh, what can I do? What extravagant thing can I do? And so she brings a year's worth of perfume, and she pours it on his feet. This extravagant gift that she generously just wastes on him. And I say waste because guess what the disciples said, specifically our boy Judas. Judas. This is his one line, not really, but this is his main line. And he's like, oh, why this waste? This could have been given to the poor. And Jesus probably looked at Judas and said, Judas, you ain't giving nothing to the poor. What are you talking about? You're trying to sell me for some money. The difference between Mary and Judas was their motivation, and it revealed their heart that Mary was full of love for Jesus, and so there was no gift too much to pour before him. And Judas was like, no, let's keep this for ourselves. I take care of the money. I see the books. Jesus, what are we doing here? I will say, in our generosity, it's not just about our finances. It's not just that we're generous with money, though I think that can be it for sure. I want to be generous with my prayers. I want to be generous with the way I forgive. I want to be generous with my words and being an encourager. Have you ever met Joseph Winger? He's generous with his words. I want to be generous with my time. Do you know how many times Austin Bolton has driven me to the airport? He's generous with his time. I want to be generous with my home. There was recently, actually, it's a fun little story because they're here. Caleb and Alex got married this past year, and I got the opportunity to do premarital counseling with them and then doing their ceremony. And I just have this common question where I'm like, hey, what would be like, is there a verse? Is there something you want me to say? This is your ceremony, something that you want in your wedding. And usually it's something very much about love and very easy to weave it in. And they just said, oh, yeah, absolutely. Can you talk about the party tithe in Leviticus? We just really want people to come to our home and be able to experience the generosity and hospitality of God. And so, can you talk about Leviticus in our wedding? And I thought, no, I cannot. I don't know how to do it. But we did it. We're generous with more than just our finances, but we should be generous with those too. It's the very thing that breaks this selfish mentality that we have. This thing that keeps us, we were born selfish. And one of the greatest ways that we can combat that is with generosity. It's through giving. So I'm going to read this again. These were enemies or barriers of generosity, but how do we unlock some generosity in our lives? So 2 Corinthians 9, 8 through 11. And God is able to bless you abundantly. Just hear that. God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all you need, you will abound in every good work. As is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous in every occasion. And through your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. Why should we be generous? The first reason is because God is generous. We have a generous God who has given us. We all, if you're in this room and you've said yes to Jesus, I'm telling you right now, you have it better than you deserve. We have a generous God who has generously lavished his love. It's one of my favorite verses in Deuteronomy that talks about that he lavishes his love on us. Just wasting, lavishing, excessively giving his love, calling his people his special treasure. God is able to bless you abundantly. He will also supply and increase your store and seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. And you will be enriched in every way. This whole thing talks about and points to the generosity that we have of a good giving God who is a good father. He longs to give good gifts. He says, y'all don't give good gifts. I give good gifts. You try to give good gifts. How much more will your heavenly Father give to you good when you ask? John 3:16, you might know it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. God so loved the world that he gave. Our story starts with a gift, and it was a generous one. He didn't give the outer court angels of heaven. He said, my son. I'm going to give my son. 2 Corinthians 8:9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, by his poverty, might become rich. You know the grace of our Lord Jesus. Though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor. He took on, this is Philippians 2:7 and 8. He emptied himself, taking on the very form of a servant, becoming obedient unto the cross. He poured himself out as a gift. John 15:13, we know, no greater love is there than this, that a man lay down his life for his friend. This is what Jesus did for each one of us. He poured himself out. We have a good Father who gives good gifts. We can't outgive him. He promises to reward us. He promises to be generous. He longs for us to be cheerful givers. He is a cheerful giver. He's not stingy. He's not giving you good things because he has to. Right? Like maybe that's your perspective of like, kind of, I know God says he's good and he's going to bless me, but I don't think he really wants to. No, he wants to lavish you with good things. He is the generous one. Therefore, we also can be generous. Our generosity responds to his generosity. But then this thing about generosity is that, I'll just say it this way, generosity ripples. Generosity ripples. God said to Abraham in Genesis 12, I will bless you and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. You are blessed. Every blessing that you have. We just took a whole day, hopefully for most of us, more than that, to think of all the ways that we have been blessed. I love that. Hold on to that and take those things. Take those lists. Read your kids' lists that you made them make. Take your list that you put down and say, look at how I've been blessed. Now I get to be a blessing. I have been blessed unto being a blessing. We've been blessed so that we can bless others. God is generous to us, and it enables us to be secure and generous in our blessing. You can give because you know he's going to take care of you. You can give. You don't have to hold on to material things. You don't have to hold on to your time. He's going to, if you are giving with a cheerful heart because you love him and because you love people, he's going to take care of you. We can be generous because he's generous. 2 Corinthians 9:11. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. Every occasion. We can be generous when you have much, when you got the bonus. You can be generous when you have little. It may look different. You may have to get creative. Guess what? He's the creator. He likes creativity. You can be generous at all times. In 2 Corinthians 8, Paul's writing, and he's talking about the church in Macedonia. He says, we want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that he has given among the church in Macedonia. Just listen to this. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. This church in Macedonia, in an abundance of affliction, at all times, at any moment, they are going through great affliction. Their abundance of joy. They took their joy and they mixed it with their poverty, and it became generosity. It's not saying they were doing so good. This is the thing, like I talk to like a lot of like young people that just the desire, they just say, I just can't wait. I want to be really rich so I can give to the kingdom. Beautiful. Start now. Because if you don't do it now, you're not going to do it then. Because generosity doesn't come when you get more stuff. Generosity is started in the heart. You begin to do the discipline of it now. And so that in every season, in hardship, in trial, in their extreme poverty, spiced with a little joy, it becomes great generosity. I love it. They gave to people. This church in Macedonia. Do you know who they gave to? They gave to people that looked and sounded different than them. It's a Gentile church. They gave to Jewish brothers and believers, brothers and sisters in Jerusalem. They didn't give just to their own, though that's in here too. He's saying, Paul's writing, he says, hey,